Namaste and good afternoon. My name is Jairam. On behalf of the Krishnamurti Foundation India, I welcome you all for this online webinar on the theme of what does it mean to be a teacher in a Krishnamurti school? The Krishnamurti schools provide a challenging environment for persons who see teaching as a self-chosen vocation. We feel that this webinar would be very relevant and useful for all of us who are teachers or those who are engaged seriously with education. For this talk and presentation, we have invited Sri Alok Mathur, who will be the anchor and speak of some of the aspects of being a teacher and what it might mean to engage with the distinctive educational aims of these schools. I'm sure all of you will find it meaningful. A brief introduction to Alok. Alok is a senior trustee of the Krishnamurti Foundation India and formerly the director, teacher education at the Rishi Valley Education Center. Alok has been an educator for over 3 decades in the schools run by Krishnamurti Foundation. He is currently a visiting faculty at the Azim Premji University, Bangalore. So we welcome Alok. Over to you, Alok.
Yeah, good afternoon, Jairam, and welcome to all of you who are present. Though I cannot see you all, I hope we will remain connected through the duration of this webinar, and later we will be able to interact perhaps through some questions and responses. So the topic of my talk, I will just begin sharing screen. Just give me a minute. Presentation and talk is what does it mean to be a teacher in a Krishnamurti school? Now, I think this topic has in fact 2 aspects. What does it mean to be a teacher, first of all? And I think this is a significant question in itself. And then what is it to be a teacher in a Krishnamurti school? This adds quite another dimension to the question. So as Jairam has mentioned, I have been a teacher and administrator in these schools for more than 3 decades. Each teacher who has worked in these schools would probably have their own way of responding to the questions I have posed. In my talk, I will naturally respond from my own experience of being a teacher in a Krishnamurti school. So it will be a somewhat idiosyncratic response, but I hope this will find some resonance with you, whether you're a teacher or you wish to become a teacher, or you're just curious and interested about the life of the teacher, and especially the life of a teacher in a Krishnamurti school. Though Jairam has introduced me briefly, I will add a few words about the locus from which I will be speaking. I joined the Rishi Valley School as a teacher in the year 1982, and I've been a teacher of a variety of subjects, ranging from mathematics to chemistry to geography. I was also a house parent, to begin with for middle school boys and later for 12th grade students in the high school. I lived and worked on the Rishi Valley School campus until 2018, after which I retired from the school formally. And I'm currently serving as an adjunct faculty at the Azim Premji University, where I visit periodically, and I'm participating in giving shape to their 4-year BSc B.Ed teacher education program. Now, I'd like to start with a very basic question. Why become a teacher? What are my purposes or motivations in teaching? Now, the reasons for becoming a teacher in our society can range from something as simple as the attraction of a supposedly secure job that has regular timings, regular vacations, to the more sort of exalted idea that teaching is a noble profession, that teachers help to mold the character of young people, they help them become good and productive citizens, and so on. Now, I think such views of a teacher's role are perhaps quite limited, and as I would like to show, the demands of being a teacher are manifold, more complex, and can have a meaning at many levels. Now, I opted to become a teacher a year after my graduation as a mechanical engineer. I was quite young and uncertain about my direction in life at that time. I had read some books of Krishnamurti, and this made me take a journey and visit Rishi Valley School along with some of my friends. Now, meeting with children as well as older students in this residential setting in what is a very beautiful part of this country, this valley, I was deeply touched by their lively energy, and I felt a strong impulse to be a part of their growing life. So I applied to become a teacher, thinking that I could possibly teach science subjects at the middle school level. But at that time, I had little idea of what teaching in the school would mean, what it would require of me. And when I joined the school, I was assigned to teach initially mathematics to younger students and chemistry to older ones. I was also involved in physical education, spending evenings in the playground, and a particular program at that time because we had a swimming pool. I was also a kind of informal coach in the swimming pool. Now, very soon, alongside my teaching responsibilities, I became a house parent to a group of pre-adolescent boys, as I had mentioned earlier. Now, the first few years of teaching were indeed extremely challenging for me on many fronts. I was new to teaching and I had to practically relearn the subject knowledge in the subjects that I was teaching. I had to learn to think and plan and try to engage students in different ways in the classroom and, of course, outside the classroom too, being a residential school. I needed to relate with children and colleagues in many other contexts. There were other responsibilities to fulfill. And amidst the busyness of all this, one had to find space for a few moments of quiet and self-renewal. Now, from 1982 to 1985, Krishnamurti, in the last few years of his life, visited the school annually in the winter months. He held intense discussions with teachers as well as lively conversations with students. He emphasized that we are all human beings first and then teachers. He was deeply concerned with the flowering of each one as a whole human being and demanded that in our teaching as well as living and working together, we should work towards creating an ambience and relationships that would enable this deeper intent of the school, the aim of what he often called flowering in goodness. I was, of course, moved by his passion, but this was a challenge that I felt was very, very difficult to undertake. I was quite young at that time. It was nevertheless the beginning of a journey of learning about what it truly means to be human and also what it means to be a teacher. Until today, many decades after his death, Krishnamurti's impact reverberates in me and in the schools, and I come to see in newer ways its profound significance in all our lives. So looking back, I can say that a teacher's life requires active intellectual engagement, a growing social emotional intelligence, a sense of humility, as well as a lot of stamina and resilience. And this is not only in residential schools where you willy-nilly need to take up multiple responsibilities, but also in day schools, which are attempting against the odds to sustain a deeper vision of education in this fast-changing, complicated world. There is a chapter titled The School in Krishnamurti's very first book on education, Education and the Significance of Life. This is a book he wrote around the 1950s. I think it's almost like his first outpourings on what he felt education ought to be. And in this, he articulates in broad brushstrokes the overall purpose and ethos of the school that he had in mind. And he also writes about various human and organizational issues that are likely to arise in the functioning of such a school. Now, here is a brief quote from this chapter. It is of utmost importance that all the teachers in a school of this kind should come together voluntarily without being persuaded or chosen. For voluntary freedom from worldliness is the only right foundation for a true educational center. If the teachers are to help one another and the students to understand right values, there must be constant and alert awareness in their daily relationship. Much later, he also wrote a series of what he called letters to the schools, which were published later as a book. And in this, he pursued at great depth themes of individual and global concern, which he asserted must be part of the educational concerns of these schools. In fact, there are 72 such letters, and they have a wide range of themes. And I recall as a young new teacher in the 1980s, every fortnight we would receive such a letter. It would be cyclo-styled and a copy given to each teacher. We would sit together in a circle in the staff room, and the letter would be read out. And then we would try and absorb its content, and then discuss it. So some of the themes in these letters, I will just give you a flavor of them. Self-centeredness in our lives is one theme. Reward and punishment, and how do we understand that, and what place it has in our lives, and what does it mean to not function through reward and punishment. Order and freedom. I think he was very, very concerned about having an inward sense of order which would reflect in an outer sense of order, and he felt that this was the only basis for a true meaning of freedom. So he explores that in this letter. Knowing yourself was of great importance for him, and working together. What does it mean to work together as a staff body, or as working together in any context? What does it mean for human beings to work together? Harmony with nature, another deep concern of his. And then, of course, he writes even about human survival and what that would require. And of course, he wrote about a different kind of education, and he had a chapter or two specifically on the teacher. So other concerns that he spoke about with the students and teachers during his visits were in fact very prescient. So some of them were about the fragmentation and divisiveness in our societies, ongoing conflicts and wars, impact of computers, machine learning, and the role of what we now call artificial intelligence. He had already given us quite a preview of that this is the way the world was going to go, and what impact would it have on our human minds. Of course, he spoke about the seductive attraction of the entertainment industries, the sports industries, the television, which was at the height in those days. And of course, much later, there have been other forms of entertainment industries too. Then he also spoke about the increasing degradation of the Earth's environments. Of course, I'm sure all of you would be aware that all of these concerns have only heightened since his lifetime. Now, coming to the Krishnamurti schools today, one characteristic of the Krishnamurti schools, and I focus here on the KFI schools, though there are schools, there's a school in England, Rockwood Park, there's another school in US called the Oak Grove School, but the schools I know best are the Krishnamurti Foundation India schools. These schools have, since the time of Krishnamurti, remained relatively small in their student strength. They have not tried to increase their numbers, because I think one of his tenets was that unless there's a closeness of relationship, a vital kind of education was not possible. So these schools range in strength from 120 students in one of the smallest schools to around 400 students maximum in what would be the largest of the schools. And in each class, there are about 20 to 25 students. Now, each school is also located in a beautiful natural setting, and I will just give you a quick glimpse of the 6 different schools in India. The one you see with the beautiful rainbow across the mountains is Rishi Valley School, and that's the sports field at Rishi Valley, which has the towering rocks around it. And this is the oldest of the Krishnamurti schools, having begun around 1931. And the youngest of the Krishnamurti schools is the next image here. That is Pathashaala, and it's in a flat green landscape, south of Chennai. And then we have here in the other corner, the Sahyadri School, which is located on a hilltop, which is facing a river, which has been dammed, and it's another very beautiful setting. And below here, we have the school, which is in Chennai. It's an urban school. It's recently relocated this campus and now just completed 50 years of its existence. And then in the other, the red building that you see here with the trees and the lawn is the Rajghat School. It's the assembly hall of the Rajghat School, which is actually located on the banks of the Ganga in Varanasi. And the corner picture here is the art village, what is called the art village at the Valley School in Bangalore, a little outside Bangalore, I would say, though the city is now quickly catching up with its location. But the Valley School is like a little oasis in the midst of that city. So these are the 6 Krishnamurti schools. And most of these schools have been around for quite a while, and each one of them has developed and sustained a certain culture, non-competitive practices, and a unique curriculum in the midst of a highly competitive and charged educational environment that is what we have in India. They've also changed considerably over time. partly in response to the changing environment and culture of their local regions, changes in their students and staff body, also in response to changes across the world, across the country. The pandemic brought its own pressures and challenges for these schools, and each one adapted in its own way and learned things out of that period. Hence, we could say that all the schools are not as if they belong to one mold or emerge from a single blueprint. In fact, Krishnamurti never gave any blueprints for a school. He spoke only at the level of the basic intentions of what a school should be, what the relationship should be, etc. And yet, Krishnamurti's vision is a common thread that runs across these schools. It comes up it's like a background hum, and it also provides a kind of reference point that comes up in meetings, discussions, and any self-reflection or review that people in the school may undertake to do so. Now, all teachers who join these schools are inevitably introduced to Krishnamurti's ideas through his writings and recorded videos, as well as staff discussions on a wide range of topics. The schools allow for considerable richness and innovation in the ways of educating children, especially at the junior and middle school levels. Being affiliated to various examination boards at the school leaving stage, the senior school students and teachers face greater external demands and pressures, but here too there is some flexibility in the ways people at the school adapt to meeting exam requirements. So given this brief background, I would like to now pose the question. So how might a new teacher respond to and become a part of this challenging educational environment, which has each one having its own dynamics and flux? So if you are a new teacher, I would say firstly, you must be aware of what has brought you into teaching. What do you value in this environment? Also, you need to learn to appreciate the freedoms available to you in the school, as well as recognize the constraints in the school's expectations and requirements and how you respond to these. And as you interact with students, the teachers, other support staff, as well as parents, how do you react? How do you understand the climate, the relationships, and the culture of the place? To my mind, it is important to enter the community of teachers in a spirit of learning. For else too quickly, one can start judging people and situations and so lose sight of the many opportunities for learning and growth as a human being and a teacher. And there are many such opportunities for a teacher in any of these schools. And I will try and outline some of these and what some of my learnings have been. Let's put aside for the moment the deeper intent of these schools and look at the everyday life of a teacher. A primary demand it places on you, and something which Krishnamurti often spoke about, is to have right relationship with your students. So what could this mean? Now, I believe that your initial relationship with students often develops through your attempts at making the subject you're teaching comprehensible and interesting for them. And this in itself is quite a challenge. So you need to not only delve into the deeper into the structure and nuances of the subject content, well beyond what you may have studied. And you also need to imagine how to present teaching material from the point of view of young learners. And this was quite a learning for me, I can tell you that. You need to figure out different ways of connecting your students with the curricular content, its concepts, its skills, and so on. Also, I think as you teach the subject, you need to form a wider perspective on the subject and its connections with life. How, for instance, are languages, science, or math, or geography connected to the life of children and to a wider environment, local environment, and to our wider environment as human beings? And what are some values that can be drawn out from the very nature of the subject? To arrive at and communicate these, it requires imagination in planning and teaching, close observation of students' responses, creating materials that are engaging, and a growing ability to involve them and enable different kinds of learning in a variety of students. The students also come in a wide range with different backgrounds. So how do you engage each of them in learning? A concern for this wholesome growth of the intellect and skills in your students also necessarily means that the teacher needs to widen their repertoire and modes of teaching and learning, in assessing and providing feedback, all of which are part of the work of a teacher. In doing this, you engage students in thinking, encourage them to ask questions, support as well as challenge individual students, Some of them in turn may challenge you with their questioning or the specific interest they want to pursue. So there is much to be learned in this arena of teaching and learning a subject with a group of students. And you also have the opportunity to create your own teaching learning materials. I would like to at this point share some examples of teaching learning materials that we created at Rishi Valley, which have the aim of promoting a certain sense of relating to the world around. Let's start with some material for very young children. So this is a page from a very simple but effective methodology for learning Hindi for beginners. People who are just learning the alphabet and they learn the alphabet, each alphabet through a certain poem. And this poem here says, वर्षे वर्षा हो इस बार, वृक्ष लगाओ कई हजार, शुद्ध वायु की कमी नहीं हो, वन से धरती हरी भरी हो. So you can see a picture that illustrates this. There is vocabulary to go with it. And the same poem can be sung to a song. Now, this poem is not just a set of words, but it's also something which evokes an actual activity which children do in the school. And in Rishi Valley, I remember from the early days that I was there, we would, whenever it rained well during the monsoon, our estate manager would take us all out and we would be given saplings, and all the children, the teachers would go together in planting trees. And this, I think, happens as a matter of course in many of the other schools. And so a lot of the greening of the campus has happened through this kind of a process. And this gets reflected in a very gentle way in the curriculum of younger children. Slightly older children, again, speaking of a Hindi lesson, the choice of the Hindi lesson is based here on the remarkable story of Louis Braille, who invented the Braille writing for blind people. And reading the story and doing the activities that go with it raises awareness about persons with disabilities or special needs, their intelligence and capabilities, and I think goes some way in making students sensitive to the diversity of people whom they are likely to meet in life. Going on to briefly a more complex teacher-created worksheet, which is a geography worksheet titled Human Impact on Planet Earth. And this can be best used with students of class 7 or 8. And I am sharing 2 of its 8 sides. So there are 8 sides to this worksheet. The second page that you see shows a pictorial depiction of 2 early stages of human existence on Earth. And these pictures, you will notice, are richly drawn. They invite close observation by students. There are a couple of guiding questions there, which lead to a sharing of observations and often very lively discussions. And once they have discussed it, the students actually then write down their own perceptions, what they've observed, what they notice, and any questions that they may have in the boxes that are provided. Now, after examining in detail various other stages, and each one has a picture to go with it, stages such as the growth of towns, the formation of empires, colonization and exploiting resources of distant lands, the whole industrialization push after industrial revolution, and then the contemporary push for urbanization, which is all around us. The last page of this worksheet, which I'm showing you here, is a snapshot view of the Earth and the environmental problems we have generated by our changing lifestyles. The question at the end asks students to reflect on how the relationship of humans with nature has changed over the last 90,000 years. So this is another teaching learning tool in which students can form a wider perspective on our contemporary lives, learn to see the world as a whole, and are invited to be more thoughtful about our human impact on the planet. If I were to design the same worksheet today, I would probably add another page or 2, which would include some very tangible aspects of what we call climate change. And this is something we experience year upon year. Students are aware of it and they must understand the causes of it. So these are some examples of teaching materials which you use in the classroom. Each school, I think, has created its own bank of unique curriculum and unique sorts of teaching learning materials. Now, as a teacher, however, you meet your students not only in the classroom, but also over meals which you eat with them, in the playground where you play with them, or just walking from one place to the other. And as you come to connect with each of the children, their qualities, quirks, tendencies, they become a distinctive strand in your understanding of them. They become part of your consciousness. And over some months of teaching the same class group, you become aware of the unique flavor that each child brings to the overall chemistry of the class group. Each class group has its own chemistry and dynamics, and you see a lot of relationships happening, things shifting and changing. And it's a dynamic and evolving process. And a teacher who's in contact with them over a period of time as a teacher, you become very aware of it. The children are also very conscious of your presence in their lives, and your responses matter to them. And in multiple interactions with them, much more gets communicated than the subject you teach. Attitudes, values, quality of questioning, feeling, thinking together. So as their teacher, you are aware of a living current that flows back and forth between you and your students. And this flow can be energizing for the student as well as for the teacher. And I would say this is one of the things that really drew me to become a teacher in the school. On the other hand, you also realize that forming fixed images of students, leaning towards some favorites, ignoring some, or becoming mechanical and authoritarian in your dealings, these kinds of reactions cut off the flow. They create conflicts, and they leave you in an isolated space vis-a-vis the students. Some students can either become dependent on you, or many can become resistant, or they can shrink away. And such learnings will come to you if you reflect on your everyday experiences with students and realize that these are things to be avoided. And having older, experienced teachers as mentors also helps in making you more self-aware. Now, this responsibility for being self-aware of one's expectations, one's reactions, one's impact on a child is even more acute when one is a house parent, which means that apart from teaching in the classroom, you also look after a group of students in the hostel. And in this role, you are like a surrogate parent, overseeing and participating in the daily life of a group of youngsters. Along with managing the living environment and the rhythm of their day, a lot of relational and emotional issues often arise, sometimes between students, at times vis-a-vis another teacher, or even with you as their house parent. There is homesickness, group formation, someone feeling left out, at times aggression and bullying, a difficult encounter with one of their teachers, and the occasional student who is weighed down by problems at home, perhaps between his own parents, and who seeks to unburden himself. How do you deal with such situations as they arise? How do you maintain a sense of fairness and objectivity in your dealings, even as you connect with each student in particular ways? This is no easy responsibility. It cannot be met by simply projecting some ideals of good behavior and expecting others or oneself to live by these. Rather, it calls for alert self-awareness, a dynamic understanding of oneself, as well as of complex human situations, even as they arise. And this is an arena where there is so much to be learned in terms of emotional intelligence. And any teaching that happens is less with reference to the do's and don'ts of rules that are framed or a moral code that is suggested, and more through developing a sensitivity in both students and the house parent. For as a house parent, sometimes even a student can show you, if you are open to it, your own errors of judgment, your lack of understanding of a particular situation, and that can be quite salutary. And reciprocally, the house parents' responses have a significant impact on students' lives and on their sense of well-being. So as I mentioned, there's much to learn through living with a group of students. And I would say this has been one of the greatest arenas of learning and maturing and growing as a person for me. Now, having spoken about the importance of relationships in the classroom and the hostel, let me now turn to the other deeper educational concerns that Krishnamurti has seeded in these schools. How do we as teachers relate to these? And what can I do in this regard? Now, each of us will approach Krishnamurti's vision of life and education through the prism of your own life concerns and what has come to matter to you in your own life journey. Some who join these schools may already have familiarity with Krishnamurti's teachings, and I had a little bit of familiarity, not too much, and they may come with some prior expectations of themselves as well as of the school, and at times even a somewhat idealized view of how things should be. But the reality of any school is always more complex and many-layered, and so it is hardly amenable to a quick evaluation through any preformed mental frame. As a newcomer, when you observe things around, participate in conversations with other teachers and students, and you listen to Krishnamurti or read some Krishnamurti, you may experience discourses and actions that seem quite contradictory. To my mind, to make sense of the school environment at any given juncture, requires a certain patience and a quiet understanding of the human complexity of the community of which you are now a part. And it's a community that is tasked with working towards a high purpose and is at the same time an organizational setup that is shaped by its own history, its particular structures and set of people, and its responses to increasing societal and as well as governmental pressures. But in the midst of all this, I think any attentive listener or reader of Krishnamurti may be struck by what I think is a sense of wholeness, clarity, and sanity that Krishnamurti brings to an understanding of the many inner and outer life issues that we are all faced with. And this is our common ground, whether we are in this school or elsewhere. So these schools are not some kind of ideal oases, and all the human factors are also present here, even if they might be in subtler forms. So among these inward human issues are things like comparison, competition, conflict, fear, and mental tensions of different kinds. Engaging with Krishnamurti's insights on the human condition can help you to see the link between such factors, the inward factors, which are very much part of you, and their larger manifestation in the society at large, which includes the power structures that you see, the social and religious divisions, the escapism into entertainment, and the many forms of violence that are around us. Now, Krishnamurti indicates in different ways the qualities of mind that can deal with these issues and learn to relate well with others and live a correct, productive, and creative life. One key to this, he points out, lies in being sensitively aware of the darkening influences that shape our minds, the instinctive comparisons that arise, the self-images that we hold, the subtle ambitions, the insecurities about the future, and fears that operate at many levels. It is not easy to free ourselves from their intense hold, but if we are sensitively aware of them, see their dangers, we can learn to allay these in ourselves. And this allows, I believe, the emergence of a natural sense of affection and emotional intelligence in responding to oneself and to others, and a greater clarity in functioning. So I think this is really the starting point for responding to Krishnamurti's deeper concerns. But of course, it's not just you in the school. There are many other people whom you're working along with. So the challenge of nourishing the seeds in the school are manifold. And it is the responsibility both of the individual teacher as well as the collective functioning of the community of administrators and teachers to keep uncovering these seeds that Krishnamurti had planted and nourishing these both within themselves and in the school community. This, I think, is their greatest challenge and struggle. For this is an endeavor that cuts against the grain of our wider social conditioning, as well as the traditional approaches of running a good school. For even schools that profess humanistic and progressive aim, even here, those of us in positions of responsibility can sometimes resort to top-down approaches to people management vis-a-vis the allocation of work, the system of incentives and disincentives, and percolating down the line, teachers might begin to rely on punitive measures to deal with students' aberrant behavior. And this is often done in the interest of what is popularly called efficiency or so-called discipline. However, these approaches, as Krishnamurti has pointed out often, do not make for right relationship among the adults in a school or with students. So going back to his early book, Education and the Significance of Life, at some point Krishnamurti has stated, and this was at times when school structures were typically headed by one person who was the principal or the headmaster, and they had a lot of say in how things went in the school. Today things have changed quite a bit, but still I think it's salutary to listen to what Krishnamurti says. Today a lot of organizational structures are much more participatory. There are groups of people who run schools, not necessarily one individual. Though I think in the past, some of our Krishnamurti schools have also been headed very strongly by one individual, and that has had its own impact. So he has cautioned at that time, the center cannot be made up of the headmaster or a small group alone. The staff should not be under the domination of the headmaster, and the headmaster should not assume all responsibility. On the contrary, each teacher should feel responsible for the whole. The whole staff should meet often to talk over various problems of the school. Now, this suggests that administrators, while holding functional responsibilities, need not take all the burden on themselves and become central authorities. They need to invite teachers, the older and the newer, to participate in essential aspects of decision-making and share the practical responsibilities of running the school. Hence, there needs to be a collective sense of coherence along with a certain sense of autonomy for individual teachers, an overall spirit of cooperation rather than competition among adults. Now, all the schools, all the KFI schools have endeavored to create forum structures and processes that are meant to keep alive this intention and for these seeds to be nourished. And to the extent that dialogical engagement and conversations become part of the school's ambience and culture, a different quality of relationship is experienced by students and teachers who are a part of it. And it is this, I think, that creates the soil for teachers as well as students to be receptive to the deeper educational seeds that may be planted or drawn out and nourished in them. In fact, there are several life concerns that any teacher in these schools can identify and engage students with, because outside the academic periods, which are timetabled, all the schools also have other forums, sometimes in the timetable, such as circle time or culture class or K dialogue sessions. The names vary depending on what age group you're referring to, where small groups of teachers and students or a teacher and a group of students come together for, taking up things which are outside the academic curriculum. And here it is possible for a teacher to initiate open discussions on a wide range of topics. Students are encouraged to ask questions, articulate different points of view, and listen to each other, read a passage and discuss this, do some reflective writing, and so on. In fact, let me give you a flavor of what are called culture classes, which are across all these schools. So here's a brief description of a culture class by a teacher of young children, class 4 level. She writes, children bring up their immediate specific concerns in culture class, as it is a space for conversation and seems more free than the other classes do. We may go into such a concern for a bit. So young children may start with saying things like, this teacher was very angry and shouted at us today. We were rowdy in that teacher's class. Today A and B had a big fight. This boy or girl always irritates us, and so on. This must be quite familiar to people who work with young children. They come to adults very often with a lot of complaints. But the adult, it's the art of the adult to eventually connect it to a larger, more general question about how do you relate with each other, how do you behave, what is appropriate, becoming aware of your own reactions. And over time, students come to distinguish the space of a culture class from the space of a general free chat session. With slightly older children, let's say grade 6 or above, you can bring up other kinds of questions, or children themselves bring up questions. So here's a set of questions about understanding social relationships, and questions start very close to home. So a child may ask, why do some of us form groups and leave others out? Why do teachers tell us not to form groups, but themselves always sit with the same persons? So here's a child who's observed something, is curious and wants to know, and this could lead to a worthwhile discussion and a certain understanding of what's happening there. Or why are we often rude to each other? What makes us react angrily? Why can't we be more patient with each other? Here are children trying to understand their own reactions. What happens inside them when they begin to speak in rough language? What makes them do that? Or the teacher may ask questions, comparing ourselves with others. How much does it happen? Is it necessary? So you can make children thoughtful about this. Because otherwise, it's an automatic thing in children to compare. He's got this, I've got that, teacher this, teacher that, you did this, he didn't do that. So to slow that whole process down and begin to actually try and make sense of why are we doing that? Is it necessary? Can we not relate without that? Or the teacher may ask, how well do I listen? What prevents my listening? What hinders my listening? A child asks, why are people often cruel to animals? This can even lead into a discussion about diets. Meat eating gets discussed, especially since the schools are vegetarian and children often miss eating meat. So why is the school vegetarian? What does it imply? Etc. Now, this is a very interesting and important question that some child has asked. Why do many people prefer having boys rather than girls in our country? It goes to the heart of a very critical social issue in our country. The boy fetish, the patriarchy, girls being treated in a certain way, and how that may be changing, but that there are roots to this, deeper roots to this in the tradition, and so on. And then I think a larger question here, asked in very simple terms, why are there wars? Why do Hindus and Muslims fight? Why do we have to follow a religion? I think this process of questioning is very important because that helps children not to take for granted what they are listening to, seeing around them. They develop a certain critical understanding of how society is functioning. And it starts at a very, very simple, everyday level to begin with. These are very relevant questions for any time. I think they were relevant in the 1980s. They are equally relevant now. They were probably relevant 100 years ago too. So this is a flavor of the culture class. And for slightly older students, say 7th or 8th class students, it's also worthwhile to have them reflect on themselves and how they might have changed, what's happening with them, what are the emotional issues they are dealing with. And here's a sampler of a boy is writing and a girl writing about the same question. How have I changed? So on the left side, it's a girl who says, I have to think a lot before answering this question. Firstly, my behavior is like so bad. I try my best every time, but I just can't do it. I mean, like it's my nature now. So however hard I try, can't get over. I react very, very quickly to a person. For example, if they tease me, someone embarrasses me or scolds me, I just don't like, so I start crying or scolding that person. Now, all these are natural reactions, but the girl is troubled by what's happening to her. After coming to RV, I think I'm trying my best to get over these problems. I'm also a very sensitive girl. If I can't stand what the person is saying, and if it is something bad about me, I feel very weird inside. Who wouldn't? So she's trying to get a grip on her emotions, what's happening. And then she ends with saying, overall, I think I'll try my best to get over these problems. Now, her teacher, may engage her subsequently in conversation, and help her make sense of these emotions that she's feeling. And how to hold herself more lightly, how to, what does it mean to react like that? Why does she do it? What happens? And so on. The boy writes, not in a very good handwriting, but he says, I had become extremely sensitive towards animals. My interests in philosophy have started. My reactions towards girls in the start of my RV life wasn't so good. At that time, at that stage, many boys try to keep away from girls. They don't like to be teased with some girl. And he says, well, it's all right now. I don't mind being next to a girl, and so on. I was really ignorant towards GK. I've observed my interest developing, and I have turned from a spoon-fed child to a self-responsible one. So this boy at this stage seems to be more at ease with himself, but boys grow a little slower. And this is all teachers at the middle school observe, that their issues, their complexity starts slightly later. They worry about their masculinity. They're not growing tall enough. They get attractions towards girls. They don't know how to deal with it, and so on. So writing about oneself, one gives the window to the teacher as to what's happening. And I think it begins a practice of them looking at themselves too, which is a very important part of, I think, self-education, if I may say. Now, teachers in all the Krishnamurti schools also encourage students to relate with nature in different ways. These pictures sort of give you a quick sense of things like planting trees, watering plants, cooking produce from the soil, climbing trees, or just sitting quietly on rocks. Why would one do that? Well, I think this is a very interesting thing. Sitting quietly on rocks in a natural setting. In doing all of these activities, in fact, children learn to use their body, their senses, and they also appreciate the beauty and joy of being in nature. A certain way of relating anew with nature, because many children who live in urban areas otherwise do not have that feeling for nature, which I think the schools try to evoke, bring back. Young children have it, but as they get older, they start getting absorbed with many things in their heads, with social media, with gadgets, and so on. So I think this is a very, very important aspect of, making them aware of other capacities that they have, their own senses, which need to be brought alive. And teachers and students also learn about the difference between attention and concentration, which is something Krishnamurti often spoke about when he visited the school. And he actually led students through little experiences for them to see this. And here's one thing which he said at some point. Do you know what it means to pay attention? When you pay attention, you see things much more clearly. You hear the birds singing much more distinctly. You differentiate between different sounds, various sounds. When you look at a tree with a great deal of attention, you see the whole beauty of the tree. You see the leaves, the branches, you see the wind playing with it. Have you ever done it? Attention is different from concentration. When you concentrate, you don't see everything. But when you pay attention, you see a great deal. Now, a practice in some of the schools is to sit together, sometimes the whole school, sometimes part of the school, to sit together quietly for a period of time, watching either the sunset or the river in front of you, with no specific goal or preoccupation. Now, in doing this, we experience the value of being fully attentive to all that is around: the sky, the hills, the rocks, the trees, all the sounds and the colors. We also become aware of our own thoughts as they form, dissolve, give way to other thoughts. And at times, one may experience a gap in one's thinking. And at times, the quality of silence may descend upon you. And this is indeed very energizing and rejuvenating. And once students have experienced this quality of silence, it is something that never leaves them. They learn to draw upon this capacity at various points in their life, especially when they are faced with life's challenges. To go back to yourself, to gather yourself, to be quiet, and find ways of resolving whatever has happened. I think things come to you much more clearly if you are able to experience that silence. Now, apart from all this, teachers of older students can also create context for other educative experiences, and each school has its own ways of doing this. For example, students can participate in different kinds of field work. Some of these I've already mentioned, tree planting and so on, but also agricultural operations. If they have land around them, they can take part in some farming activities. Garbage management is a very, very big issue nowadays, and they learn at an early stage how to do it on their own campus at least, and try and understand why the problem is so huge. Schools also create their own interdisciplinary general studies courses and projects outside the exam curriculum, things like local area studies, architectural mapping, socio-economic surveys, etc. A wide variety of films on different topics are shown and discussed. And students listen to invited talks by people who bring frontline accounts from different domains they work in, ranging from environmental concerns to social and political work to arts and culture. They also travel on longer excursions at some times of the year to places where they experience life situations or in different environments and engage with realities of communities which otherwise they would not come in contact with in their urban settings. So students have in the past visited tribal areas, interacted with fishing communities, been part of ecological restoration projects, gone to historical sites or archaeological sites. They also, of course, go to see the work of a science laboratory and industry and different kinds of NGOs and their work. Now, all these and several other approaches attempt to foster in students a measure of self-understanding, a feeling of cooperation rather than competition, as well as a greater awareness of the human and social issues in the wider world that they will participate in as they grow up. Economic issues also, I shouldn't forget. And they are encouraged to keep alive the question, what am I doing with my life? So as they leave school, I think this is the question we hope that the students are carrying with them. They're not just flowing with the pressures and influences which they've grown up with, but they are trying to find their own direction in life and are concerned with doing something which is meaningful for them and which is meaningful also for society and for the world. Now, I would say that this is equally a question for the teacher. What am I doing with my life? For it is a question that you are faced with at any stage of your life. And coming back to where I started from, I would like to set out questions that I feel are important questions for teachers to ask themselves. So, very first question I already said, why do I want to become a teacher? And once I am a teacher, I can take stock of these questions. What is the quality of my relating with students, with colleagues? Am I aware of my reactions and tendencies, my intellectual and emotional responses to others, to life situations? What are my challenges in this? Because it's not a straightforward thing. We come with pre-built reactions and tendencies, and how do you become aware of them and work with them, and try to approach things in a more constructive, creative way. And also, what am I learning as I am teaching? Because no teacher can be a true teacher unless they themselves are learning. And there are many, many things to learn as a teacher. And as you learn, you also, your purposes in teaching also change and grow. They widen. So what am I learning as I'm teaching? What are my purposes in teaching? And then some further questions, I may say, questions particularly relevant for teachers in a Krishnamurti school. Am I able to, and any school for that matter, am I able to work with others and help create the soil for nourishing the seeds that I've spoken about earlier? In what ways am I able to or not able to create context for inquiry among students? So one need not feel bad if one doesn't know how to create a context. It may come as you sort of widen your own repertoire of teaching. You become more comfortable with students and with an environment. You begin to see opportunities. So this may happen as you go along. And in what ways am I able to or not able to find context or sense the contexts which are around actually all the time for a deeper self-inquiry? We may ask, what is the purpose of this deeper self-inquiry? Now, Krishnamurti speaks of the timeless sacredness of life and of all creation, which includes all of us, the human being and the teacher. Most of the time, we are too caught up in the everydayness of our daily lives and are unmindful of this dimension. However, for the educational aim of flowering in goodness to have a generative, living meaning, and not just a catchphrase, it must have its basis in this feeling of the sacredness of life. Krishnamurti points out that this sacredness, wholeness, or benediction in life, as he sometimes referred to it, can be approached only through actual living and inquiring into the very texture of our life and mind, and freeing ourselves from what are often self-imposed, darkening limitations of our thoughts and emotions. And while this inquiry is open to anyone, anywhere, I feel that teachers in a Krishnamurti school are specifically invited into this inquiry, and this is perhaps their highest calling and their greatest challenge. And even after you stop formally being a teacher, this inquiry may continue in its own way through one's life. So you can always ask, what am I doing with this precious gift of life? So I'd like to leave you with this and all the other questions. And at this point, I will stop speaking. Thank you very much for listening to me. Stop sharing.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Alok, for opening up lucidly the different facets of being a teacher in a Krishnamurti school, the challenges, demands, as well as the fulfilling nature of this huge responsibility, and also for raising those pertinent questions for every educator to inquire into. Listening to you would have probably helped many of us connect to why Kay had clearly stressed that the role of a teacher is not merely to prepare a student for a successful career, and how the teacher has a greater and wider significance. In fact, in the intent of schools, he makes the statement where he says the teacher and the taught learn not only to inquire into the outer, the world of knowledge, but also the inner, the world of the psyche and the psychological realm and our own conditioning. So, thank you for bringing up all these points in a very lucid way, also giving suitable examples. I think relating to students beyond the classroom is a very important thing. Being a part of their lives is definitely the role of a teacher, simultaneously nurturing this deeper sense of inquiry. I think it is only in learning that we teach, as you had indicated. So we have another 30, 35 minutes to pose questions to Alok for him to respond. What we would request you is to type those questions into the Q&A icon that you will see on your screen. We'll try to take up as many as possible, time permitting. And please keep the questions brief and something that would interest everybody so that it will be meaningful. So, Alok, while people are thinking about it, may we start with one or two questions that have already been.
Just give me a minute, Jairam. I just changed my position slightly to get away from the sun that is falling on me.
Sure, right. Sorry.
Yeah, now I'm good.
Yeah. So one of the first questions that has come up on the question box is a fairly straightforward one, which probably is in the minds of many people. It goes like this. I would like to know the process of faculty appointments at the Krishnamurti schools. He would like to also visit the school if possible, is what the question has mentioned. So would you like to briefly talk about how our schools invite and engage in conversations with people who are interested in joining the school?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether it's fair to give a collective answer for all the schools, because I think each school has somewhat different processes, but I think I'll talk about what I think are the commonalities here. So I think people get in touch with the schools in different ways. I think in the past, it used to be sometimes through an advertisement which was put in a newspaper or a magazine, but those means have gone now, I think. And I think people become aware of, the possibility of joining a school through social media, through websites and so on. So typically people write to the schools and say, I'm interested in being a teacher, this is my background, etc., etc. And I think after some filtration, because it's difficult to invite every possible person. Sometimes, in fact, a few schools have a questionnaire and they ask them to actually fill in that questionnaire. I know that Pathashaala has one, the school used to have it too. I don't think we've had that in Rishi Valley, but we actually invite the people to visit the school and spend a little time in the school. And here also different things can happen. Sometimes they stay for, 2-3 days in the school, sometimes even a bit longer. And it's not one interview kind of a thing which decides things. So they should look at the school themselves and see how it sort of works with their idea of what they want to do. And secondly, I think they are meeting different people. They're meeting, of course, the principal, they're meeting other people also, senior teachers. They eat meals in the dining halls. People get a feel of that person as an individual, as a person, and not just look at the qualifications and look at the kind of academic or teaching experience background that they bring. And I think it's with an overall mutual assessment, I would say, the person interested, seeing whether that environment works for them, and the school also looking and seeing whether this person would be really a good person to add to the school. And also, of course, if there is a vacancy, because there has to be some vacancy, you can't, indefinitely expand your staff there in the areas that that person is interested in. So I think these are the kinds of processes. There is no, written test. There's no other. It's more a human-to-human interaction, which I think results in some decision getting made. Yeah, some schools, there is a practice also of getting to observe them teaching a class where, an experienced teacher would sit in the class, see how they interact with the students and what their manner of communication is. And that also becomes then part of the ingredient of reviewing their application. So I would say these are the ways in which the schools.
Yeah. If I may just add a short bit to what
Jairam, you can add something from Valley School. Yeah.
Yes. With regard to visiting the school, while the schools are welcoming, it's also important to see when it is convenient. So the right way would be to write to the individual school through email. The addresses are available in the website, indicating the interest and also giving a short background. The schools will respond. So visiting the school should not be a problem. And as far as the accepting or finding an opportunity to work in the school, it will depend on all the factors that Alok has just mentioned. One is the need of the school. We also have to make sure that the requirements of the board or the council is met with. But more importantly, it is also to see the willingness, the openness to go beyond the actual skill of techniques and pedagogy. That is anyway important, but not the only important thing. So this can only come through conversations and interactions with the school. So that will be of some variation between the schools, whether it's a residential school or the day school. So the right thing would be for any of you to write to the individual school. Now, let's look at the next question. Um, this is a person who is very familiar with the school, who talks about his familiarity with Krishnamurti's fundamental principle of no reward and no punishment, and asks whether it has been rightly understood by students and teachers alike. The idea of treating a student first and foremost as a human being deserving equal respect has more or less been accepted by the teachers, but he is not sure if the same is extended to teachers, and whether the callousness and indifference, as he calls it, among some of the students um, has been recognized, and is this being addressed in our schools, is the question. Do teachers gain respect, is the summary.
Um, Very difficult question to answer from my vantage, partly because I'm not in a school right now, and I don't think it's a temporal question either. Let me just say, in terms of, I think I very lightly sketched out a little bit about the kind of ambience and relationships that one hopes the school has. It's not necessarily just a top-down, traditional way of handling teachers, and allocating responsibilities, giving your job. This is what you need to do. You need to attend to. There is some conversation which happens with teachers about the work they have to do. I think, treating teachers as people who have their own agency, they have their own thoughts, I think is a very important thing. And it's something which administrators, those who are working with creating the overall atmosphere of the school, need to be cognizant of. So I can say there are these general principles, but carrying teachers along rather than slotting them into different things, which very often happens in rigid organizational structures. I don't think our schools in general are built that way. And there may be sometimes a teacher who feels, one way or the other, not met fully, or, those are, as I mentioned, that there are complex human interactions also behind it. The complexity of the teacher themselves, as well as the perspective that the administrators are bringing in, and how they meet, how they interact will decide how. Maybe at the beginning I said each individual teacher will have their own journey through these schools, and the questions I have posed will also be responded to differently by different people. I would say, in my own experience in the 80s when I joined the school, I felt there was that general sense for all the teachers who were there in the school of being reasonably well met. There were very clear demands also, not that there were no demands, but there was a certain flexibility of looking at you, looking at your nature, not, seeing what is appropriate for you to do, what is not, at the moment a challenge you should not be given, and so on. So I think thoughtful administration is probably what I would say is required in the schools. And as long as that is operating, I think this issue need not become a big problem. That teachers are not treated as human beings. And, so only the students were supposed to be treated as human beings. I mean, there have been times in the school's history, I've gone through, historical records where things are veered one way or the other. But I think the schools have a way of finding their own balance again internally.
Right.
And I think we have processes also, as I mentioned, structures, processes where we reflect on these things. There are these periodic reviews of all the schools where some of these things come to light, and then, it's fed back to the administrators and the teachers. And then they try to find ways of actually shifting the balance. If it has gone too far on one side, too laissez-faire on one side, or too tight on the other side. I don't know whether that responds to the question.
Okay. So here is a question asking us about how can we help senior students not to cross boundaries and also help them to face challenges. This probably is indicating about the typical nature of rebellious nature in a high school, but at the same time, gently pricing open how important it is for them to feel responsible is how I
Yeah.
interpreted. Let's hear you.
Yeah. Maybe this I'll respond more personally because
Yeah.
I was a house parent for 12th standard boys, which is, the school leaving stage, and that's the age of 17, 18, where they very much are their own persons. They don't, take kindly to guidance from teachers. They would like to have their own understanding. I think it's very much related to the way you build a relationship with those students. If I think, and it's not that they will not cross boundaries. I think one should be conscious that they will have that tendency in small ways, sometimes in bigger ways. But then how do you deal with that? Sometimes you have to be very firm and strict if it's something which is harming, themselves or other people. And sometimes you have to engage them in conversation, get them to see things, which they are not seeing themselves. Yeah. And sometimes you have to, I think I have found myself becoming quite emotional sometimes. They see how it's affecting me if they behave in a certain way. And, if on the whole, you have a thread with each student, you're interested in them, if you are paying attention to them when these matters are not happening, you're asking them how they are, spending time in the evenings with them, even taking them for walks, playing with them. If you have a connect with the students, then I think they don't do things outrageously, which will, really land themselves or the school in trouble. So I have responded very personally, but I know that every school faces multiple issues, and each school has to deal with it depending on what the house parents are doing, what the administrators are doing. Uh,
Mm.
Sometimes you have to be very firm because you have to draw certain boundaries where the students really need to know that here I can't cross it.
Right.
Because
Right.
it's going to affect everyone else
Mm.
and the atmosphere in the school.
Right. Yeah. I think your response also addresses one or two other questions of similar nature where a teacher wants to know how do I deal with mischievous students present in the class? Doesn't matter how much I interact with them, they just don't listen. These are the typical challenges that all of us face.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think what you have talked about is so important, the quality of patience, the quality of being consistent, and also when you establish a relationship of trust and affection,
Yeah.
then even when we are firm or very demanding, it
Mm.
comes across as communication rather than a command. So I
Absolutely.
think these challenges can only be dealt through that consistency, dialogue, and
Yeah.
consistent display of affection. Yes, I think you have addressed two three of those nature.
Yeah,
Here is
I think
one.
you responded to that perfectly, Jairam, yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, One question is about teachers.
Yeah.
This person has concern about teachers. She feels that teachers today seldom demonstrate empathy. How to get them to be mindful? They come with a lot of stress and fail to cope with the pedagogy of the school, and hence they change their profession. How do we empower them? I think it would be good to listen to you because you've also worked on this area apart from others on
Mm,
teacher education, mentoring,
mm, mm.
mentoring young teachers as well as the experienced teachers. How to help teachers to be comfortable and at ease with what they are doing is probably what is being asked. Would you like to say something on this?
Yeah, I think each individual brings a different set of issues and concerns which they come with. And I think a little patience on the part of the school, the people who are receiving them in school, to try and see where they're coming from, what's happening with them. Again, not very quickly slotting and categorizing and judging anybody,
Hmm.
but having some sort of I use the word of flow,
Hmm.
flow beginning to build up a little bit. Yeah. And then, of course, young people today, I do understand they have a lot of stresses because the way the world is, the kind of divisiveness, the violence, the kind of social media bombardment which is there, you know. So I think many people actually appreciate being in a quieter environment and an environment which has its own rhythm, and that has a certain healing effect on young people. But there's also a certain restlessness, I think. And also, in comparison, my friends are doing this and I'm here, all that sort of a thing may also happen. So I think one is if they begin to find meaning in their work, And that, I think you have to draw that out of them. What is the meaning they find in their work? Why are they there here in the school? What are they intending to do? To draw out that growing side of them. Because everyone has a growing side which is in looking out for things which they would like to, grow towards or grow in, or also things which they are trying to make sense of in themselves. So, apart from administrative relationships, I think mentoring relationships are very important in the school. And young people do need some kind of an experienced mentor. I would say that I was a great beneficiary of mentoring when I joined the school. I was at sea with many things. I was confused about many things, including all the things you mentioned, how to deal with mischievous students, what to do. And there were older teachers who kind of helped me to see myself also, not just see the students and how to deal with them, but see my own reactions too. I think it's this kind of a process which it's really about you're a human being and a teacher. And as a human being, how do you understand yourself? And then, okay, what can you bring as a teacher? So if they find meaning in their work, a certain steadiness probably can come in. Yeah.
Right.
And yes, even if they leave the school after 2-3 years, if they've carried something with them, that they've grown in some way, they have, drawn from this environment, certain attitudes have got loosened, shifted, and they're going to carry it to their next workplace. I think it would be a good thing.
Right.
I think ultimately a school is about human growth. And it's the growth of the teacher as much as the growth of the student. And I think if we are concerned at both those levels, and it's our own growth, each one, including the administrator, is also not a fixed form, crystallized entity.
Surely. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think your response also addresses a couple of concerns that others have raised about the challenge of gadgets and social media, especially since it is getting rampant with TikTok, news, etc.
Yeah.
How it is affecting the minds and behavior of students today, youngsters today. And also another question, what kind of support is available for new potential teachers who do not have a formal teaching experience, but have an inclination and cultural fit to the KFI schools? These are questions for which I think you responded. Would you like to add anything more to these two aspects?
I think there are two different questions here. So
Right.
The second one is maybe a little easier. A teacher who doesn't have teaching experience, I was exactly in that boat. I would say mentoring is very essential for such a teacher, because you can otherwise flounder in your initial. It's one thing to I love children, and I've tutored my nephew, niece, and they've all enjoyed learning from me. And it's another to teach in a classroom setting, 20 students. And even if the school has very intelligent programs like self-learning programs and so on, you have to understand the spirit of what is involved in learning, what is how child's mind works, how group dynamics works in a classroom. And I think a mentor is very important. A certain amount of reading is very important. And so good, articles, literature, which is what I said, it needs a lot of intellectual engagement apart from your emotional responses. And so that is something which I think if a school has structures and supports like that, it is very good. I think partly nowadays there's greater demand, partly government pressure also, that you should come with a teaching degree, a B.Ed degree. Now, I would say, till a while ago, I would have said the B.Ed degrees are so useless in India that actually it's a detriment. But I think there is a shift taking place in teacher education now. There are probably better programs which are coming into being. And I think if someone comes with a certain preparedness of that kind, I think it helps. Even then, coming into a new school and an environment which is unfamiliar, you will face many challenges, and mentoring within the school still becomes important. But if you come with some pre-reading, having had some kind of a coursework, having had done some understanding of education and teaching, learning, human development, children, I think it makes a difference. The second question, the earlier one about gadgets and so on.
Social media.
I think it's a very fine line here which the schools need to sort of walk. It's very difficult to completely, in day schools particularly, it's not easy to ban them. In a residential school, I think we have taken the approach, no gadgets. And I think when children came back after COVID, I mentioned that many schools responded differently depending on how COVID hit them. They had come after a whole year of being just locked into gadgets. And I think when children came back after COVID, I mentioned that many schools responded differently depending on how COVID hit them. They had come after a whole year of being just locked into gadgets. When they came here and they came into an environment where we said no gadgets. There was a lot of, I think, from what I've heard, I was not there actually as part of the school. We were ourselves not allowed to go to campus at that time. But I've heard that initially there was a lot of unhappiness or restlessness of a certain kind among students. They were not sure how to handle themselves. But very soon they began to really appreciate that they were in an open environment. They could move around. There's a certain, contact with nature. I think that's a very important ameliorative or corrective which a school can provide. Have more and more contact with things which are natural rather than things which are whirling in your head or images that are being, uh, uh, you know. So I think partly it's by managing availability of these. The second thing is also, I think, discussing these things and not just simply banning, discussing it, seeing, how the mind works, what happens to your attention span, and I think it's the problem not just for young people, it's also, I think, older people now are quite attached to gadgets too. So I think you can learn a lot for your own reactions too. And, there's a certain compulsion sometimes to keep checking the mobile phone or, to do this or that and see why this has happened, what is its effect, what are its dangers. Uh, Young people may not get it right away. They may still want to keep breaking the boundaries and going back to that. But I think if you keep at it, again, consistency of a certain kind, then slowly some of them actually start appreciating the fact that you have
Sorry.
access to it. I was told by, in fact, some of the one teacher in Shibumi, but how the parents and the school worked together. This child had gone almost, depression because of the gadgets, and they had to keep him away from gadgets for a while. And initially, he was very, very hurt, and reacted badly and so on. But because they kept it consistently for a while, later he thanked the school. He said, "I've gotten out of something I had gotten into." So there are many such things happening today, and I think it requires quite a lot of ingenuity and intelligence on the part of the adults, also watching themselves and how they behave with gadgets, and not assuming that it's only young people who are prey to this.
Right. Okay. Okay, here is a question about parents. So the questioner says that he has worked with some private schools and is disturbed to see parents who are only interested in seeing how much information children accrue. And they tend to see the scope of study in monetary terms and career alone. And self inquiry and such other things have nothing to do with the study, as they call it. So he is asking, how do we address this mindset? How can the psychology of people be eliminated? But what he is probably referring to is how do our schools address this mindset of parents who come with very selected, narrow expectations on the school and learning?
I think this is sometimes a vicious circle because parents have these expectations and the schools play into them.
Hmm.
And then it's a problem that is self-reinforcing. But if the school itself is a little, differently oriented, and if the school realizes, people in the school realize that these are things which, then I think it's very important to engage with parents. Parent education is a very, very key part. I think of a wholesome upbringing, the parent and the school need to work together. But if the school itself is treating parents as clients who have to be satisfied and whatever they want the school must cater to, then it becomes a self-reinforcing cycle. But if
Hmm.
the school can bring a counter messaging or a counter communication, I wouldn't even call it messaging. You really need to have a communication. Look, this is what's happening to your child. If you put only academic pressure, then there are lots of stresses they're going under. Let them, don't talk about inquiry and so on to start with, but at least, let them have a more balanced life. Let them have, some physical activities. Let them do yoga. Let them learn to be quieter. All these are the basis for a more, I would say, healthy, sane, fruitful life. And parents need to realize that they are pushing their children to become very one-sided human beings. And if they themselves have gone that way, then they need to question their own, attitudes. And I'm sure in the day schools, Jairam, this must be, I'm sure, an ongoing communication that
It
all of you
is continuous, especially in the metro cities. Yes.
in the metro cities. In Rishi Valley, we are a little away from the parents most of the time. And when they come here, they are here for 2, 3 days. We have, uh, you know, conversations with them, sometimes with groups of parents and so on. I don't know how much we are able to shift their attitudes, but in some way they have, given over their children to the residential school, and the school has a certain hand in, creating the culture which the children grow up in.
Very true. Very true. See, while it is very difficult to alter or change the mindset of parents, one attempt that the schools are making is to clearly, succinctly state our priorities and expectations on the parents,
Yeah.
even as they
Enter
come
the school.
for admission. So,
Yeah.
to a large extent, that incompatibility is addressed, even though subsequently you will find parents who are anxious about this particular aspect. So from the beginning, when we are able to stress that this is the priority of the school, there is some confidence, there is some conviction that builds in parents also. So that is one other way that we do it. Yeah.
And then through their journey in the school, some parents actually change. They begin to see the
Yes, they
value
do.
of, a more holistic life rather than a career-driven life.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. Okay, so here is a question which asks, do you think it is challenging for a teacher who has gone through a traditional education system to adapt to the culture in KFI schools? Very realistic question. Very,
Yeah.
I think it would be nice to listen to your response in this.
Yeah, yeah. I think many of us went through a traditional education system. I think it depends a lot on your inclination and whether you have even questioned that system a little bit. What did it mean? How did it affect you? Are you comfortable with how you sort of grew up in that? Because people say, I went through a traditional education, I'm fine, absolutely. But I think you don't realize many of the things that have got actually conditioned in you by the traditional education system. If you begin to even slightly question it, if you slightly open up to the fact that it actually narrows you down in many ways, it may
Mm,
give you a lot of skills and academic, grounding and so on. Some people, I would say, it actually has this effect of dividing people into the haves and have-nots, which I
mm,
think our schools are very careful not to try and do. Every child has its own talents and abilities, and it's not just judged by the marks that they get. So if you are beginning to question that, then I think you have every grounds to be able to adapt to a new culture and see its value. And that's the other thing I pointed out. When you're a new teacher, what is it that you value in this environment? If you are conscious of that, if you can see that there are some freedoms to explore here, even though there are constraints of different kinds, then you will grow with that. Yeah.
right. That's true. So there are two or three questions, Alok, about quite difficult terms that we can't give very clear answers, but I'll
Mhm.
just read them out. One is, how would you define a good human being? The other one asks, what I understand is that K wanted the schools to create an environment so that the students connect with the wholeness of life to
Yeah.
move towards exploring the immeasurable, the sacred. Please
Mm.
throw light on on nurturing this higher aspect of education. I think even in the intent, he talks about from
Mm.
ancient of times, man has always
Yeah.
sought this sacred and so on. So
Yeah.
there are two or three questions in this realm. Do you want to talk about it, which is beyond the area of intellect and the tangible area?
No, I think the good human being question is easier to respond to. I've often talked about that because it's a very, I think, for me, one of the central things in Krishnamurti has been his notion of goodness. And I've tried to sort of, look at that whole thing through my stay as a teacher in the school and subsequently too. So I think a good human being, if I can just put it very quickly in bullet points, which is not a
Mhm.
good way of approaching good human being, but still, one, I think you need to have a good thinking mind, good intellect, be able to think clearly, use your intellect well, but you also need to, cultivate your emotional intelligence and relational capacities equally. So I think there are often one-sidedness which happens in this area. I would say that's a starting point here. Then I think being aware of things which are happening around in the world, the way nature is being destroyed, to in some way reconnect with nature, find little spaces because nature has a lot, very subtle ways of actually entering your bodily system. To be conscious of your body, its relationship with nature, to sort of take learn to take care of yourself, things around you. So sense of care, I think, is a very important part of being a good human being.
Mm.
And also, as I think in my talk tried to outline, there's a lot of darknesses also within us, which we carry. uh, Fears, anxieties, and fears, anxieties have their roots in two or three very basic things. Comparison and competition is one. Insecurity about the future is another. And in some way, certain desires that sort of take over you, which fill your mind. So to be able to sort of see these operating in you, not let them take a hold on you, and to keep that space going in the mind, which allows you to not get caught in it, to be relatively, and I can only use the word relatively free of those things. It's not easy to be completely free of the hold of those. I think all of this, and if one is in, and students learn this not by direct teaching, they actually learn it by living along with people who are concerned with this. It's an absorptive learning. So, and there's also each person has their own nature, and they have to understand their own nature and their tendencies, that, the aspect of the immeasurable and so on. I think I would say it's a very rare thing that a student picks that up in the school. I think it's there in the environments in some way, in the atmosphere, yeah, and as long as I think there are at least a few people who are engaging with that aspect of the environment, just the feeling of the sacredness of life, as I mentioned at the end of my talk. I think if that feeling is something which you cherish and live with, and as a teacher and as teachers, you gently point that out, and if a few students pick it up, it would be wonderful. I don't know how much it happens. Sometimes I think it happens to young people much later in life. I think they have to go through many life experiences and go through their own knocks, understand the nature of human conflicts, the sorrows that it creates, till a certain self-inquiry begins. And it's only that self-inquiry and freeing yourself from all these impediments that even puts you lightly in touch with that deep silence, which I think is a part of that sacredness. About the
Yes.
immeasurable, I would have nothing to say.
Thank you. It's very meaningful, Alok. The suggestive pointers that you have given, which is not prescriptive either about what it is to be a good human being or immeasurable, then it becomes just another definition. But these pointers are definitely worth examining. Thank you for that. Well, I think it is 5 o'clock, and though there are a few more questions, I'm afraid due to paucity of time, we may not be able to take any more. I would like to thank Alok for this very meaningful engagement that he has created for all of us the last hour and a half. And thank you to all the participants. We hope you will continue to participate in the webinars in future. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you, Jairam. Thank you, Siddharth. And thank you, all of you participants, for being here, and also for all the wonderful questions that you got me to think about. I don't know whether I was able to do any justice to responding to them, but thank you.